All right, everyone, thank you so much for joining us once again for another episode of Speaking of Data presented by TDWI. Happy to be joined today by Evan Levy. He's returning again to discuss navigating AI governance in conjunction with our upcoming boot camp, which we'll talk about as well. Before we get into all the good stuff with Evan, I'm also happy to announce I have a co-host, TDWI President Meighan Berberich. She's going to be joining me for all upcoming episodes. I'm happy to have a partner in crime, if you will, for this podcast. So, Meighan, pleasure to have you here. And I'll just
So
open the
happy to
floor.
be here.
I'll open the floor and say to see if you have anything that you'd like to mention here before we jump into the content with Evan.
No, I just, early in my career, I was a podcaster, worked for Blog Talk Radio before it was even podcasting was a thing. But happy to be on the podcast and super happy to talk to Evan about this important topic, AI governance.
Well, that's great. And Evan, let me go to you quickly here. How are you doing today? I know we're going to get into some good stuff here around AI governance, but thanks again for joining. How are you?
Oh, it's great to be here. In fact, life is so wonderful. If I died right now, they'd have to chisel the smile off of my face. No, I'm always have fun with these podcasts. So thanks so much for inviting me.
Terrific. Well, I do want to start off jumping into the questions here with, I think, probably a great level setter for everyone listening. And Evan, I'd love for you to define what AI governance is for us in layman's terms and why is it necessary?
Thanks for the question. I think it's always valuable whenever I give a presentation, or in fact, do the AI governance class that I teach. I think we do have to discuss, well, what exactly is it that we're talking about? Um, and there's lots of different definitions, and I try and simplify stuff because it shouldn't be that complicated. I think the first thing to keep in mind is artificial intelligence is not like reporting, analytics, and business intelligence. It's operational processing. So really, the whole idea of why do we need AI governance is the same reason we need IT governance over transactional systems. We want to make sure those AI systems behave the way we expect them to in a consistent and reliable and ethical and legal manner. I mean, there are things that we're going to allow AI to address autonomously. Go study a bunch of data and tell me what's likely to happen. And you want to make sure that it's behaving in the way you want it to behave. So why do we have AI governance? To basically put some boundaries and ground rules in that when we have processing occurring, there's no surprises and that we're aware of what happens.
So, Evan, we've seen in TDWI research, especially, we just ran a survey and over, two things really rose to the top, and they're somewhat related because generative AI and the application of generative AI is a top priority for a lot of organizations that we support at TDWI. But also, AI governance is coming to the top of the list. Over 50% said right now that is a top priority for them. Um, what are the things we're governing for? Why does AI need to be governed at all? What are some examples of things that could potentially go wrong?
Well, uh, let's let me pick two case studies, two examples. I've got a simple AI tool that's predictive pricing. Now, how does a predictive pricing tool works? It's going to go and take a look at the audiences, the information about the audiences or the clients, what the products are, what their prices are, and try and understand, well, what's the right threshold or detail necessary to pick the right price, and it's going to pick the right price. Um, Let me pick a second example, which is the other side of it. And I like to use retail examples because I think they're easy for everybody to understand. The whole idea of replenishment. If someone buys something, well, I need to put something back on the shelf. Now, you don't just order them as they're purchased because there's things like costs for shipping. There's shelf space. You've got multiple locations. So there's a level of analysis that says, okay, what's sold, what's likely to be returned, what's likely to have been stolen, and so forth. So it looks at all that type of data in detail to try and figure out, well, how do I replenish and make the new orders? Now, if we take a look at those two examples, there's things that companies use as an accepted practice, and there's things that are off limits. I'm not allowed to look at things like someone's religion, uh, details about them to determine what the price should be. It sometimes it's legal, sometimes it's ethical. Well, I don't want my AI tool to just use all the data without regard for what the rules and policies are for using that information. If a human being was doing it, I'd say, you know something, you're not going to look at age, racial profiling, or those types of things. Now, realistically, some of that stuff's not necessary for pricing, but I'm trying to discuss this from a broader sense. Um, the whole idea of AI is think, and let's teach an engine or a system to think without a human being. Well, but the fact is, this is a term that's commonly considered as if you don't have a human in the loop, when do I need to make sure that something's checked so we don't make mistakes? I mean, there's well-known examples where uh, Amazon actually had built something to take a look at all the different resumes of people that they hired, only to realize later on that, oops, what we didn't realize there was bias because people tend to hire people they know. So if the predominant workforce is males over the age of 25, guess what? The resumes that
Yeah.
were used were the people over age 25. And when Amazon noticed that, there was no intent to do anything wrong, but they said, wait, we didn't have a human in the loop. There's circumstances where you've seen where an EV on some sort of automated drive hit somebody because they didn't understand it wasn't a pylon or a post, even though you probably don't want to hit a pylon or a post. So why do we need governance? It's not just to prevent those problems from happening. It's what have we done to ensure that things are tested and reviewed? When I've got an AI system or any transactional system that's establishing price, you want a human being somehow, or you want some level of checking so you don't do stupid things, which used to happen on the internet all the time 15 years ago, which is I could buy a flight to Bermuda for 12 cents, or I could buy a can of tuna for a nickel, and it wasn't supposed to be a nickel. Mistakes could happen. So, what AI governance also does is what are the processes and methods for producing and releasing things. If I'm going to have an automated assembly line, what are the inspection points for that assembly line? I mean, there's this perception that AI governance is something unique and brand new that we've never done before. It's like, it's not. If I look at IT governance, what are the methods and practices put in place when I release a transactional system? Just a standard pricing system, just the credit card check and fraud identification. Now, some could say, well, fraud's always been AI. Fraud has not always been AI, but what were the things that we put in place to ensure that before I release a piece of code, it followed our design methods, it was ethical and legal, and it produced what I expected, and we tested and we checked it. I mean, if anything, AI governance is really just more of a logical extension to IT governance methods that are already in place. We want to make sure that we're not surprised and that we don't cause, one could say, a catastrophe, but let's dial it back a bit so we don't have an unanticipated or unexpected result. And there's one other piece, and let me take a page out of something else. Let's say I make satellites for a living. I got to launch them into the sky. Well, something that people may not know, if you go to the handful of companies that build satellites, they actually keep track of every part, every piece, who touched it, who worked on it. They have spares and things because once something's in the sky, I can't service it. So
Yeah.
part of that governance process is how do we think about repairs, adjustments, fixes, corrections? That's part of what also goes into AI governance or IT governance. So why do we have this? We have it because this is what you do when you produce and release software that's making decisions and taking actions. The adjustment here is how do I broaden this for artificial intelligence? But a lot of the things that I've just mentioned has been in place in a lot of companies for production migration and checking and so forth for just standard applications. I mean, do you worry that when you purchase something that credit card isn't secure, that your credit card information isn't secured? Well, that would be part of AI governance too. So again, it's really how do we add that legality and ethics and human in the loop aspect, and that's where there's some adjustment because of AI. So that's why you need it.
I imagine, I mean, and it's both the systems that they're deploying, like internal AI initiatives that or applications that are being built within the enterprise. But with the AI, there's so many of these external AI tools that can be used personally for productivity at work. And there's got to be rules around how I mean, how you use
Let's
tools, right?
okay. Well, let's peel back the layer on that because again, think about what companies do when they introduce a new laptop or PC. Someone's gone through and checked, usually, does it work with the software that we expect? Does it charge or how does it work? And those types of how do we patch it? How do we update it? The same thing goes for whether it's a new version of Microsoft Office or a new version of Windows or all the variety of tools that most IT organizations have. There's a method and a process that many of them go through to bless the use of a particular tool. And a lot of that's done for support reasons. It's also done for risk and liability reasons. One of the reasons that organizations are that way is they don't want an unknown piece of software behaving poorly or potentially causing an unexpected outcome. Again, um, same premise. So whether it's something that's been custom built with AI or it's an AI tool. I would argue whether it's an AI tool or a standard tool, there's some level of testing and blessing and review that's necessary. Clearly, AI has some incremental features, but I would tell you that AI is such a broad um, spectrum of tooling. Um, Things like uh, visual or video awareness type tools or graphics generation or the chat bots that respond, they all have differing features and functions. And the aspect here is what governance really needs to focus on is not that it's AI. It's what are those features and functions and where's a human not in the loop? And then
Yeah.
how do we make sure that it's been blessed or reviewed? And the other piece of AI governance is the same thing that goes into just products in general, which is, and what's the ongoing analysis or investigation or monitoring? And in the same way, if I produce vacuum cleaners and I have a lot of call-ins, the Federal Trade Commission and all kinds of other federal agencies want to know, hey, has there been damage? Has anybody been injured? Are there issues? Are you checking? Have there been things unanticipated because of recalls and stuff like that? Well, think about what's produced is almost like a consumer product. What are you doing to monitor it and track and measure it? So if there's a surprise or an issue, you're prepared to respond. So again, I feel really wordy here, but I guess that's the premise of the podcast. The idea is that I would leave people with is you probably have some things in place already for just traditional technology deployment. How do you adjust to add those AI pieces? And as you mentioned, Meighan, it's not just the custom built stuff, but also the stuff you're acquiring and using that's a packaged tool.
You know, you bring a good point up here in regards to somewhat being surprised with different use cases and having to try and wrangle those all together. And over the years that I've done this podcast, it seems as though governance generally was sometimes forgotten or on the back burner, and AI seems to have brought it back into the spotlight here. Even that being said, it sounds like based on the stats that Megan mentioned, there still isn't like 100% awareness of the importance, or maybe even the methods to deploy specific governance for AI. So, Evan, when you're talking with people and clients, what do you think are some of the biggest misunderstandings or surprises that organizations get into around AI and AI governance?
Well, I think there's my gut reaction to your question. And then the pieces that you mentioned is actually the first part of your question. What I found with AI in particular is something that I saw, if you're old enough, in the BI and analytics world, or that we saw with CRM and the CRM world, is people were asked to build stuff and deploy it to users that were really never in a position of deploying tools and applications to users. They have a level of technical or domain expertise, and they have some great ideas, and maybe they built some spreadsheets or built some code for a few people. But the whole idea of deploying it to dozens, hundreds, or larger audiences is not something they necessarily ever thought about. And supporting an application and deploying an application is very different than to a small group. So the first thing I tell you is ask the question, has this group of people that are building ever deployed and supported production tools? So I don't know if that's a surprise unique to AI. I think that is something that I'm seeing where a group of people that were maybe data scientists and supporting maybe one small work group are now in a much broader role because of success or evolution. And they're being asked to do things that they're not entirely prepared or aware of. And this is where AI governance is valuable. But to go back to your question, what do I think the biggest misunderstanding and surprise is? That's easy, and it tends to shock people. It's about the data. The surprise that I think a lot of people have is they think all this AI and data science stuff, it's about the sophistication of the coding or the programming or the tooling. It's like, stop. The whole idea of AI is let me study events that have happened, learn from them to be able to respond to either an anticipated or expected outcome or identify that expected outcome. It includes a very simplistic example, but there's not a top of mind awareness. Is your data prepared to be studied? Can they find it? Is it supportive of the analysis that's necessary? I worked with a music company that was all in, and this is 20 years ago. They wanted to better understand their audiences, tastes, preferences. They wanted to break it down by genre of music and so forth. But what they realized was they not only didn't have the data in one place, they didn't have the data. Um, you can't expect an AI system to generate predictive details for a price if you don't have pricing history. And that's pretty intuitive. But if I want to understand who's my best audience or who should I be targeting, I've got to study the audience that's acquired or used a particular product. I mean, what people haven't, in my mind, haven't really thought about with these chatbots and some of the whole idea of where we're going is the companies behind them, whether it be Anthropic, OpenAI, whatever, they have spent years building the learning systems to be able to answer or act in the way that they do. And you don't see it, you don't know about it. It's not a casual endeavor. Now, I'm not suggesting that we can't do AI in the context of a business and be successful, but having a bunch of files and having a bunch of data that's not well defined or organized makes it very hard for the AI systems to learn and study that detail. So for those organizations that have data warehouses or data platforms where they've rationalized and cleaned up and organized, great. But that whole data management need is the biggest stumbling block that I found with most AI endeavors. And it's not that it's not doable, the calculations, the processing, and so forth, it's doable. But the data hasn't been organized to study and address. And pardon me for belaboring this, but it's not just I've got a file. The whole idea with AI in many instances, if you think about it, is what details influence or affect an outcome. Now, with a large language model, they're taking a look at the tokens or all the unique concepts, words, and details and tracking them and the interrelationships of them. So the more data I have, the more important that organization is so they can compare all the different details. And if you've got data spread across multiple systems in different formats, meaning different things, and having sparsity like missing values or it hasn't been checked for quality, that's when things like hallucinations and other stuff happens because an AI environment assumes everything is truth. It doesn't understand things like weighting unless you can adjust it. So if I've got bad data, inaccurate data, it assumes that's truth. So you ultimately will have bad outcomes. So again, I feel like I'm being very wordy here, but what I think that the biggest surprise or misunderstanding is not investing in the data infrastructure
Yeah.
to support the AI processing that you're doing.
Well, and that's been a theme since the beginning of data time, the
Mhm.
whole data quality, the need, garbage in, garbage out, and
Well, yeah.
nothing,
Well, I think yes. And here's where I think there's maybe some misunderstandings is the presumption is that, well, I've got an AI tool, can't it figure that out? And I think it's fair to some degree that if you train the tool or the model or whatever it might be, to learn, it can clean up things like zip codes. It can figure out that's not an accurate address. And if there's missing values, so be it. But let's differentiate a single file of 200 elements versus a typical data warehouse that's a couple of terabytes. We'll have 10,000 tables and dozens, if not hundreds, of duplicated data. Um, Tables that differ only by a column or two. How is the system supposed to know which values to trust and which ones to not use? So I agree with you, Meighan. I think because of maturity, um, what is garbage is now the question, and how do we train the system on the right details?
Yeah.
Um, Years ago, someone there was a company, Pro Data Systems, and this was back in the mid '90s. Someone said, "Hey, let's look at everybody that we hired," similar to the other story I just mentioned. And what they concluded was, if you want to get a job at Pro Data Systems, you better wear a white shirt. And it was laughable because they captured, or so the lore goes, dozens, hundreds of attributes of everybody that applied for a job. And what they also didn't consider was Ross Perot had an unwritten rule in his company, which is you damn well better wear a white shirt. So again, that's understanding what's usable, trustworthy, reliable data,
Yeah.
and knowing what to use. So I'm only, maybe I'm splitting hairs. The problems we had 20 years ago, the data is just flat out wrong. I think the challenges we have now is we have so much. What are you allowed to use? What should you use? What's reliable? And who's gone through that? And then obviously things like joins, merges, and to organize it so you
Yeah.
don't double count and stuff like that. So I think it's a order of magnitude more complex because we do have better data, but we have a million times more.
So I know, a lot of large organizations, especially with data warehouses or, a relatively mature data management practice, have data governance, pretty well established data governance programs. Like, can AI governance be handled or rolled into the data governance program? Or how do you think about that? I know that's a question we get a lot. People trying to figure out the difference between data and AI governance, where they overlap, where they're different, where they should be handled, all of that.
So the snarky part of me would say,
Evan, you're never snarky.
okay, the sarcastic part of me would say, well, you've got some pain in your ankle. Should you go to an orthopedist, a surgeon, or a tree surgeon? Because of course, surgeon's a surgeon. And I'm not trying to be rude. Because it's a new domain to a lot of people, it's completely reasonable belief that, well, I've invested all this time and energy in a data governance program, and I've got some success from it. Why can't I leverage that? And on the surface, I would say, okay, however, let's again peel a layer back. The whole premise of data governance is, how do I make data usable and available, and what are the rules about it to an audience that may have a multitude of purposes or processes, whether it be a transactional system, a reporting system, or I got to feed data to a third party that's going to go do a call center or something. So the idea of rules and policies and governance, that does go together, but it's the context and the domain. AI governance has governance in the word, but as we've discussed, it's really about processing. So in fact, if I had an AI governance program, data governance would contribute to it. What are the rules and policies of the data I'm allowed to look at? But things like, how do I review and test an external tool? How do I determine what ethics, integrity, and legality and risk is for transactional processing? That's not something a data governance team would know and understand. They'd probably know, am I allowed to look at this data? But the whole idea of what's allowed from a processing perspective, what's ethical, what's legal. A good example is, am I allowed to look at data that's more than 7 years old? Well, legal people would probably say, don't you dare. And many instances, the company probably has rules that says don't retain data of a particular type longer than this, but someone found it. Again, this is where, well, what are you allowed to process? What are you allowed to look at? I'm personally, I think combining is a bad idea. I think should the data governance team participate in an AI governance program? Absolutely, without hesitation. But there's other parties that should participate in AI governance that aren't appropriate or applicable. You want the legal or corporate counsel involved with AI governance. What is the company's boundary of what is and isn't acceptable? How much testing and how much auditability do we need? That compliance world, sometimes that's merged with the corporate counsel, but the compliance world of what types of reporting and tracking are necessary so we can prove that in fact we have reviewed and tested these types of things from a coding and a production migration, someone with IT expertise on what's the appropriate development methods, documentation, testing. Those things go into an AI governance program. Now, it's not something that I'm not going to have this AI governance team review every piece of code that's ever written. That's not the idea. I mean, the idea is establish what the standards and things for staff members and organizations are that they need to follow. So you establish what are the testing rules, what are the development methods, what are the monitoring and tracking criteria and methods and practices, and then those that build this stuff have to follow those things. Again, everything I've just mentioned really isn't in the domain of data governance. I mean, the idea of data quality is very different than code quality, and the idea of human in the loop isn't even applicable
Yeah.
for data governance. And the other thing I mentioned, and I feel like again I'm beating this poor dead horse. AI governance is really about production processing, whereas data governance is about making sure data is multi-purpose and can be used by production processing or someone with a spreadsheet that's got to make a decision or things like analytics and BI and that type of stuff. So, short answer, nope, please don't combine them. And for those, if you have combined them, at least acknowledge and be aware that the type of expertise that's necessary is in addition to the data governance stuff you're doing, because it's an apples and oranges thing. I mean, in the same sense, if you look under the umbrella of IT governance in a lot of companies, IT governance also includes things like budgeting, resource management, and tracking. So again, governance is yes, we have rules and policies because of governance, but it's to that domain. So IT governance and AI governance and data governance, similar concepts, different domains. So they're different
Yeah.
things.
Well, Evan, I had this question canned here, but you teed me up so nicely
Okay.
based on that. I could because you're just talking about, governance versus AI governance. If a company was in the position where they were starting an an AI governance program, what would be the first step that you would recommend that they take? Is it keeping them separate? I mean, maybe you just answered it, or is there something else that you would have in mind?
Don't do it. Whatever you do. No, no, just kidding. Just kidding. The first thing that I would do is go take a look at how AI is either planned on being used or how it's already in use. You don't want to over engineer the program or the solution to address a problem that you don't have. Um, if you can, take a deep breath, pause, and say, you know something, let's do a little bit of inventory work. Let's spend a little bit of time. What do we already have in place? And let's talk to the consumers of these tools and products and systems, as well as the developers or support people of tools and products and systems, and ask them, what are the problems you're running into, if any? And write that stuff down because what you want to do, having a year or two or three of experience with AI governance and having it in place and running and happening, is not what you're going to start with on day 1, 5, or 30. So make sure that you've established, well, here are the problems that we're seeing that we believe need attention. By the way, get with corporate counsel. I mean, if you have the time, please attend one of the classes coming up. I know you guys are going to talk about that because I think the different classes will touch on many of these concepts. Who are the participants in AI governance and the various areas? Because you've got an audience that you're really trying to ensure that AI is successful and that no one's surprised or no one's put in a position of taking unnecessary risk and liability. So inventory the tools, spend some time with the audience, identify here's where we think gaps or issues that AI governance can help, identify some amount of here's where we're going to focus, what we think success looks like, and define success not as long-term aspirational goals. I mean, you're welcome to do that, but think about what can I reasonably accomplish maybe in 6 months and maybe in 12 months, and make sure that audience is on board with that. Because coming up with an AI governance program that everybody is fighting you on isn't going to accomplish anything. So trying to gain a level of consensus of, yeah, we all agree it would be nice if we had these things will make an AI governance more likely to succeed and also not rub everybody the wrong way because AI governance is likely to cause change. Because if there's been no direction, then everybody's done it their way, which means it's likely that people are going to have to adjust a bit. So that's what I would do. Do the inventory, talk to the audiences, find out what success means.
So Evan, you mentioned we do have a data and AI governance boot camp coming up here in a few weeks, and you are going to be teaching on that agenda on Friday. And you're diving in specifically to AI governance within the enterprise. What can people expect from that course? What will they walk away with?
Well, I actually include a roadmap of how do you define, plan, and deliver a AI governance program because all too often people want to start and they've not gone through the effort of, well, how do I define this? And then how do I launch it? So we talk about that. We also cover, well, what are likely or possible policies, rules? Who are the working teams or potential participants? How do they work together? And what are the artifacts that you need to generate? What do they look like? Because the last thing people want is a pile of paper, but by the same token, people want to know what their role is and how they can support and participate in it. So what the class that I teach actually covers is just that. If you want to do this, here's the steps to take, here's the artifacts to generate, and here's why each one of them. And we also, there's a lot of framework type stuff, which is, okay, what do these terms mean? Let's make sure that your AI governance doesn't get out of control. How do you keep it focused? That type of stuff.
Awesome. That sounds great. And clearly in demand based on what I'm seeing from our survey results recently. So I'm hoping all of our listeners out there, if you're thinking about AI, you really need to be thinking about AI governance, and this course may be worth your time.
Yeah, and as a reminder, that course is taking place March 16th through the 20th. Each day there is a specific coursework. You can find more information in the description of this episode down below. And Evan, thank you so much for your time today. Meighan, I'm looking forward to more podcasts with you.
Me too.
And for everyone else, if you're interested in learning more from Evan, tune in on Friday, March 20th, and you can learn from him directly. But thank you all again. Have a good rest of your day. To subscribe to the Speaking of Data podcast, or to learn more about TDWI's research and training on all things data management and analytics, visit tdwi.org or click the link in the description below. Thanks for tuning in.